Donkey Kong Country exploded out of a barrel of bananas and onto your Super NES back in 1994. Developed by Rare, Donkey Kong Country was a huge deal when it came out, mostly due to the attention the game's graphics were getting. Nintendo was hyping Donkey Kong Country through the roof all the way up till release, promising next-gen graphics and gameplay on the system you already own. So did it end up living up to the hype, or did the first game in the series fall flat? While I'm already sure most of you know the answer to that, let's just humor the guy reading this script for the moment and check out what Donkey Kong Country is all about. Start up Donkey Kong Country and one of the first things you'll notice are its graphics. Back then it was absolutely stunning, as the entirety of the game had been created and rendered on SGI computers and then transferred over to the Super NES. The result at the time was nothing less than spectacular. Just about every game on the Super NES up to that point featured fairly limited detail and animation. Donkey Kong Country changed all of that though, with huge, well-animated characters, awesome backgrounds, and some really great special effects not usually seen in a 16-bit game. It was so impressive that it was single-handedly responsible for starting the CG graphics trend that many 2D games would go on to have after its release. Admittedly, the graphics aren't anywhere near as amazing these days, and has an overly dark look to it sometimes. But for its time, Donkey Kong Country was almost revolutionary, and the graphics were one of the big reasons it sold so well. While those graphics may look like snot-covered sludge these days, the gameplay is still just as good as it was back on its release day. You play the game as Donkey Kong or his nephew Diddy Kong in a fairly standard 2D platformer that doesn't stray too far from the established Mario Bros. Formula. You dispatch enemies by jumping on top of their heads, or by throwing barrels at them that you find lying around the levels. Donkey Kong is a bit heavier than Diddy, so he can't quite jump or run as fast, but has a ground pound move that can take out enemies at close range. Diddy, on the other hand, is more nimble, but can't kill some of the bigger enemies that Donkey Kong can. Personally, I always preferred Diddy, since he could move faster and jump further, but each character has their own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to getting around each level. Donkey Kong and Diddy do occasionally get help from their jungle friends though, as you'll find more than a few animals that you can play as to help you throughout the game. Hit the right boxes and levels and you'll suddenly find yourself rampaging through the stage on the back of a rhinoceros, or through watery caves hanging onto a swordfish, along with a few others that you'll find. The animal friends definitely added a bit of variety to the gameplay, and all of them play differently enough to make each one feel fun and unique when they show up. If there's one problem with them, it's that they don't come up enough throughout the game. It's unfortunate, but at least playing with Donkey Kong and Diddy is always fun enough, so when the animals do show up, it's just an added bonus. Mastering Donkey Kong and Diddy shouldn't take too long, which is a good thing since getting through each area of the island will test just about everything the duo can do several times over. The sheer variety in stages is one of the game's best qualities, usually mixing things up on a regular basis. One of the more unique gameplay elements included in the game are the barrels scattered around some levels. These things essentially act as a cannon that blasts you in the direction that the barrel's pointing. This seems fairly innocent at first, but gets absolutely insane later in the game as several levels are made up entirely of chaining together successful barrel blasts from one to the other. It can get pretty tricky, but was always fun to blast your way around stages. Less fun, however, were the minecart stages that come close to harkening back to the speeder bike stage in Battletoads. And while not nearly as hard as that hot mess of a stage was, the minecart in Donkey Kong Country can come close due to its super cheap obstacles that come at you far too fast. You also get some pretty fun underwater stages that are more maze-like, along with others that can feature large obstacles not seen in other stages. And for a game this long, it's really impressive just how often you're tasked with tackling a new situation that hasn't come up before. It really goes to show that Rare wasn't just relying on the cool CG graphics to carry the game, and put just as much care and thought into the stages themselves as they did the rest of the game. Unfortunately, Donkey Kong Country does have a few problems that are hard to ignore, no matter how much you may love the game. Those CG graphics might have had an initial wow factor to them, but they can quickly turn into an annoyance depending on what stage you're playing, especially the darker stages that can turn into a muddy, blurry mess and can make platforms and characters hard to see. The inertia of Donkey Kong and Diddy can also make the controls feel overly slippery, making you constantly overcorrect yourself since it feels like you're always about to slide off an edge. There can also be some issues with the hit detection here and there, and some minor slowdown can pop up in the worst spots, making things harder than it should. Even with the few issues it has though, it goes without saying that Donkey Kong Country was an instant classic. While those Super Nintendo graphics haven't aged well at all, it was still an amazing achievement for the time. Of course, Donkey Kong Country still lives on to this day, with its latest game being on the Wii U at the time of this video. And if anything, it continues to get better and better with each new game. Unlike Mario, Donkey Kong has mostly stuck with his tried and true 2D style platforming, and has honed it to near perfection over the years. So while just about any Donkey Kong Country game will give you a great time, it's the original game that still resonates the most with me. Nostalgia will unfortunately do that to you, I guess. Personally, I think the first game is still more than worth picking up and playing though. There's some great stages and moments in here, and just like Cranky Kong, shouldn't be overlooked just because it's old.